So this information just came out about Bryan Kohberger and that he was investigated after he was arrested for what he's now convicted of a previous identical type attack on a house full of sorority students, females. So they investigated him after a masked man with a knife broke into the home of 4 sorority girls, but the one in the bedroom that the person went into kicked the person in the stomach, and he fled. So that was in 2021 in October 10th. And so the person did not know that she was awake, and they have withheld that person's name, the student. And so basically said that she had been awakened, and so was able to kick the man, the intruder, forcefully in his stomach, and then he fled. And so there was a couple witnesses to that, because another one said that they heard somebody running up the stairs. And it happened at 3:30 a.m. in an off-campus home where 4 sorority girls live. Details that are very similar to the Moscow murders, which would occur a little over 1 year later. But get this, he was ruled out. How about that? Because, well, they said, this is what they said, police in Washington investigated him after a college student reported that a man with a knife broke in her home, entered her bedroom. Okay, so the authorities launched an investigation into him as a potential suspect less than 2 weeks after his arrest for the murders of the 4 University of Idaho students just 10 miles away in the town of Moscow. The police report in the Pullman case and the probable cause affidavit in the Moscow murders detail 2 very similar suspects targeting very similar victims in a very similar setting at almost the exact same time with the same weapon. People is the one that came out with this article, and they're choosing to withhold the name of the female student because of the nature of the incident. So the man positioned himself at the foot of the bed, seemingly unaware the female was awake, and then she kicked him in the stomach. Armed intruder fled. At no point did the intruder speak. The roommate, whose room was on the same floor of the home, later told police that while she didn't see anything, she did hear someone loudly running up the stairs. The roommate called the police after the female student who encountered the intruder came to her room and told her about the masked man with a knife. So they developed a few leads at first, but they all had alibis at the time of the attack, and within a few weeks the case went cold. So then, 14 months later, when Sergeant Christopher Engel began to investigate Kohberger, a suspect, on January 10, 2023, so like the Idaho murders, which he would later confess to, this was an attack that happened in the middle of the night off campus where a group of young women were living. They were also sorority sisters. Dylan Mortensen, one of the 2 surviving roommates in the Moscow attack, told police that the intruder was clad in black clothing and a mask on the night he murdered her 4 friends. Both Kohberger and the suspect in this case entered the residence through an unlocked back door. The investigation of Kohberger was brief, however, and shut down 9 days later, because the graduate program coordinator told Sergeant Engel there was no record of the future criminology student attending any campus events that weekend. That's why they were alleged that he was there for some kind of event. But it wasn't even true. They shut him down. So police did not appear to look into the possibility of Kohberger going on a non-sanctioned visit that weekend, which would have been while he was enrolled at DeSales University in Pennsylvania. He would finish out his graduate studies in May 2022 and July, and was living 2,500 miles away in Pullman, preparing to begin his doctoral study. So the question that I beg to be answered is, what about the blood in the residence on Queen Road, basically down the road from the murdered Idaho victims? There was blood in there. There was a bloody glove. They went and took samples of that blood, and the resident of that particular apartment or residence begins, first name begins with J and last name begins with S. Why are they not talking about that blood that was in that apartment? And the person who was doing maintenance on it said there was no other person who could have access. There was like nothing. Why was there blood on the shower, on the toilet bowl brush, on the light switch, and basically in various other places? And there was a bloody glove just very near the door. Okay, so there's going to be blood on that glove. They can test to see whose blood that was. DNA on the glove. They can test to see whose DNA that was. Why does that blood not matter? That glove and the blood was learned about. They found the glove less than 2 days after the murder. So there was another person doing this a year before the attack, and it wasn't Bryan Kohberger. I'm just like, he confessed to these crimes of these Idaho murders, but it's just very problematic now that this has come out, right? And it wasn't him. Okay, it was not him. This is verified, it was not him. And now you got that blood in that residence that still we have no answers for. I'm like, inquiring minds want to know, what do you think about this? Wow.